Hey, what's going on, everybody? You are now tuned in to the Paging Dr. Chanda podcast, where we talk about mental health and the culture, and we're promoting self-reflection through meaningful conversations. I'm your host, Dr. Chanda, licensed clinical psychologist, content creator, and podcast host. And before I started this live, y'all, I was just telling my sister, I'm nervous. Like, I ain't been in the studio since, January? It's been a minute since I've been actually in the physical studio, and I'm nervous. Like, it's a natural human emotion, and I figured I would share that with y'all. But I'm feeling like the nerves are coming from various places. One of them is because, again, like, I haven't been in the studio because we were going through like such dramatic life changes. I had to take a break for a while, and it's like, I want to deliver. Like, the creator, the content creator, the podcast host in me wants to make sure that anytime I step into the room, anytime I step into the stew, like, I am giving y'all everything. And so I guess that's where my somewhat level of anxiety is coming from. But either way, I appreciate y'all for tuning in. Hey y'all, it's been a minute. Thanks for watching. But if you have been following me, you'll know that we got some exciting news. Your girl is officially a part of the Revolt Podcast Network, y'all. Yes, it's official. I'm a Revolt talent now, and I could not be at this place without you guys for tuning in, for like listening, for liking and reposting, resharing all the content, sharing it with your friends and your family. Like, I literally cannot thank y'all enough, because it was the reaction of the people. It was y'all's, ratings. It was everything that you guys did for me that helped me to get to this place. In combination, of course, with like God, favor, all those good things, because I truly believe like this is definitely something that's God ordained. So I'm grateful to be a part of the network, amongst other amazing podcasts, such as the Success Playbook podcast by my twin sister, and the Double Dose podcast by myself and my twin. So we're doing a podcast together, which will also be on the Revolt Podcast Network. Chanel, so the spring 2023 class of new podcasts, Revolt Podcast Network, I think it's 8 podcasts. 3 of those are ours.
Wow.
All glory to God, for real. All glory to God. Because I really appreciate Revolt for really seeing the vision and like really tuning into what we have going on and being interested in that and seeing value in what we have to offer. So I am truly grateful. And shout out to the other podcasts that joined the team, such as Women in Hip Hop, Holding Court, like so many other great podcasts that joined. So it's great to be a part of the label. Shout out to y'all, and again, thank you. So if you are enjoying this podcast so far, I need you to like, subscribe, make sure you're sharing the post, share the podcast wherever you're listening to the podcast. Because we're exclusively on Revolt, you can now listen on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon Music. And I'm grateful, and I'm excited, Chanel. Like, I am so excited about what is to come in this season. Make sure that y'all are Chanel is silly. She's over here in pure worship in the corner, y'all. I cannot with this girl. But I cannot wait to stay tuned with you guys and to provide you guys more information as to what we have coming up. I think we're doing a launch party too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we're going to do a launch party. We're going to try to figure that out, a good date that works for the both of us. We're going to invite y'all. We want y'all to come out, support us. Yeah, it's going to be lit. It's going to be lit. So, yeah. Make sure that you guys text podcast to 21000. That's podcast to 21000. So, again, that you can stay up to date with everything, y'all, because we got some lit things happening. And so, yeah, so we're a part of Revolt now. We got some official trailers and reels that we'll be dropping. And I'm going to be talking about me joining Revolt, like, the next few episodes, so y'all might as well get used to it. Like, this is a big deal. So yeah, so make sure y'all continue to tune in, and just don't get tired of me talking about it, because, again, all God. Alright, y'all. So, y'all know, if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, I typically go into our Hot Off the Press segment, and that is where we talk about psychology and pop culture. One thing that when I'm teaching, I always teach my students, that psychology is literally all around us. You can walk into a Wawa and see elements of psychology and how it plays out. You can, and I'm only saying that because I just came from Wawa today. You can go on a shade room. Like, there's elements of psychology in everything that we do. And so in the Hot Off the Press segment, we are literally talking about mental health, whether it's in the news, pop culture, the shade room, spiritual world, all those things. But today, we're actually going to skip that segment because y'all know I've been on a little break, a little hiatus. I haven't really been on social media. I haven't really been in the practice or in these other areas for a good month. So because of that break I took, I'm a little far removed from what's going on in the social media space, unless it's something that was directly sent to me. So if you guys have a hot off the press topic or a current event that you want me to discuss on the podcast and talk about it from that mental health psychological perspective, you guys can tag me in those posts. You can send them to my DM. You can also text them to that number that I had shared with you, 21000, because again, I want to talk about things that you're interested in, and I think that's my favorite part of the segment. So I think it'll be great for us to get back into that. Okay, y'all. So we are talking about some really great things today. How many of y'all feel like you've been pouring from an empty cup? I want you to put in the comments or wherever you're listening from or in the rating section. I want you to let me know if you ever feel like you've ever poured from an empty cup. What does that have you feeling like? How does that impact your mental health, your spiritual health? Hello, because that also is impacted when we feel like we're pouring from an empty cup. How does that impact even your family, your friends, those who are around you when we're pouring from an empty cup? And those of you who don't understand that metaphor, pouring from an empty cup, that is literally something that we say that helps us to mentally imagine the concept of giving to others. Giving whether it's resources away, our time away, when we feel like we don't have much else to give, when we feel like we're at that vulnerable state, we feel like we're at that low place where if I give to somebody else, it's going to impact me emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And this topic is going to be really personal because, of course, we had some things happening in our family over the past few months that I posted on social media. Not ready yet to talk about it on the podcast, but don't worry, I will, because I love y'all and I'm always going to be transparent with you. But yeah, so we had some things in our family that was happening, and it was a lot on myself and my sisters, my dad, our whole family emotionally. And so because of that, I knew I had to make a decision not to pour from an empty cup because I didn't want it to impact people around me. And let me just say this. God's timing, oftentimes we be feeling God's taking too long, or why is this not happening in my life? Why haven't I got a promotion yet? Why haven't I been signed to a network yet? What's going on? And we don't realize okay, all things work together for our good. There's always a strategy when it comes to timing, God's perfect timing, right? And Chanda, I didn't even share this with you, but I was literally thinking about this on the way here, y'all. So just we talked about how our podcast is now on the Revolt Podcast Network, and we started meeting with Revolt last year. We started meeting with Revolt sometime in October. And so the conversations that we had, we were going to start this contract a little bit earlier, possibly the end of last year, and then kind of transitioning into possibly the beginning of the year. But for some reasons, one reason or another, it was delayed, and we started a little bit later. And I'm grateful when it did start, because little did I know that we were going to be going through such an intense time. If we had, if we had joined the network, if we had signed that contract any earlier,
we wouldn't have been able to deliver.
We would not have been able to deliver. And that goes into what we were talking about, what I'm going to be talking about, trying to pour out creatively to other people when you're going through. It just doesn't work. And it's at times, yes, if I can be transparent, I was thinking wow, God, I've been doing this, I'm passionate about it. I wonder when is it going to happen for me? When am I going to be able to be on a network? When is this going to be picked up by some sort of brand or a network or what have you? If I had signed that contract any earlier, I would not have been able to deliver contractually, giving X amount of episodes within X amount of time. Right? Because really, for real, when we're thinking about the concept of timing, we don't always keep in mind how, again, like there are times in our lives where some things are just not convenient, and it's okay to admit that. But granted, Chanel, like when I told you to like look at your email, it was literally because I told her, like, Chanel, look at your email, like, yo, we got our contract. It was literally the day after everything happened in our family. The day after. So, like, literally, God knew that, like, we were going to be going through this significant time. So, listen, y'all can worry about this after y'all overcome this. After y'all get through this, then, you know, you can sign that contract or be involved. And really, that just, it gives me chills thinking about, Chanel's agreeing with me. It really gives me chills thinking about it because God is so mindful of me even in my tragedy. Mm-hmm. And it really, like,
even when you're a little bit mad at him.
Even when you're a little bit mad at him, Chanel just said. Even when you're a little bit upset. Even when you don't understand why this is happening to me. Why is this happening to my family? I don't understand this. Even when, you know, there are times where you just feel like you can't, like, pray. You can't, you know, talk to God or whatever. He's still mindful of you and your tragedy. And so, like, that's really what I got out of that, the delay that we experienced. Because, again, if it had happened any earlier, this is something that I would not have been able to do, for real. Like, and it just blows my mind of how mindful God is of us, for real. For real, for real. So, again, I'm appreciative of y'all, like, bearing with me during this break and always coming back. And let me just say this, like, my supporters are A1. Like, A1. Because even when I was not posting, first of all, I took a month off of social media. I barely even logged into the app. Y'all still posting my content in your stories, still sharing it, still doing X, Y, and Z. I haven't posted anything on the podcast since the end of March. And every time I get that email, that weekly email from Buzzsprout, oh, you got X amount of downloads, you got this amount of downloads, you got this amount of listens, and it's like significant numbers. And I'm like, wow, God, like the fact that like y'all are so lit and supportive of me even when I'm away for some time, I think that really disproves the myth that people have when it says like, oh, you can't take breaks in this industry. You gotta keep going even when you're tired, even when you're sick. You gotta keep creating. You gotta keep producing podcasts. You gotta keep posting content. Consistency. You gotta do it every single day. You gotta do it every week if you're going to be successful. And I'm a firm believer. Like, if I'm not feeling it, I'm not going to do it. and that's like, I refuse in this season of my life to pour from an empty cup. I refuse, because my mental health, my emotional health, my physical and spiritual health are more important to me than creating. When I'm aligned in those areas, then I'll be able to create, you know, content or whatever else I'm doing at that time. Then I'll be able to do that in a way that's, you know, effective, efficient, right? And I'll be able to show up for y'all in ways that y'all need me to show up for y'all for. But I'm not going to do it if I ain't feeling it. I was like listening to some other podcasters talk about this concept, and they were like, yeah, I never took a break from podcasting. I never took a break from creating content or whatever, simply because, like, you know, it's ingrained in this culture that we have to keep creating. We have to constantly show up, and I'm here to tell y'all that is not my testimony. Like, I took a break, and y'all continue to show up, and I am grateful for that. I truly am. I am grateful. So we're going to hop into the topic. We're talking about pouring from an empty cup, and I really want to talk to the creators today. I really want to talk to the, you know, entrepreneurs, the entertainers, the influencers who feel as though sometimes you're pouring from an empty cup, beloved, because I've been there. When I tell y'all, like, I've been there, I'm talking about a place that I've been. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that. So specifically when it comes to pouring from an empty cup, we're talking about, again, you know, giving ourselves, giving resources, giving time, even showing up to work at times where we feel as though we're not able to. And so here are some ways, I want us to go over some ways that we know it's time for us to take a break. But specifically when it comes to, y'all know I'm a psychologist, so I'm going to come in with the stats and the research. research has suggested that when people are not taking breaks, that's when it impacts our stress levels. That's when it impacts our mental health, anxiety, our depressive symptoms, like all of those things. In fact, especially if you're a creator, if you're producing a lot, if you're an entrepreneur, you're a business owner, when we take breaks and we realize we're at that state where we need to take a break, that's when we actually do take that break, that's when we start to experience improvements in cognitive ability. I'm more sharp after taking a break. That's when we start to notice improvements in even our creativity, being able to create more, right? Being able to experience just a healthy, holistic life comes from being able to recognize and know when to take breaks. But the problem is, especially in our society and our generation, we come from this hustle culture. Like you got to keep going. You got to work through it. You got to power through it, simply because we don't want to be deemed as like a failure. If I take a break, people going to think I fell off. If I take a break, I'm not going to be as relevant. If I take a break, I'm not going to be I'm not going to be able to make as much money. But even though these are relevant concerns, does that outweigh our mental health? Does that do those concerns, do they trump just our ability to be healthy and whole in a multi-dimensional way? Right? And so we really have to start asking ourselves this. So when do I know, Dr. Chanda? How do I know when it's time for me to take a break? How do I know this? Right? So the first time when we know it's time for us to take a break, the first example of this is when we have a significant life experience or some sort of tragedy happening. I cannot tell you the number of times where I'm talking to people and they talk about maybe going through a tragedy or a traumatic moment, and they're talking about it in a matter-of-fact way, like, yeah, I had to get over it, or I just had to keep working through it. I had no other choice. But we don't realize that when we overwork ourselves, when we're in those emotionally vulnerable states, and we're not giving ourselves time to take a break, time to disconnect, time away from work, and to process it and to feel the emotions that we're experiencing, we're doing ourselves a disservice by invalidating our own lived experience. What sense would it make if I go through a traumatic situation and I say, you know what, I can't take a break right now, I have to keep going? I'm literally sending the message to my brain and my body that what I went through was not significant, that what I went through did not impact me in the way in which it did. So that's one of the reasons why, I'm a firm believer. I will encourage anybody to take a break. If you experienced a death in the family, if you experienced losing a job, some sort of loss or some sort of life adjustment, that is how we know it's time to step away for a while. It's time to take a break. Because honestly, what we don't want to do is we don't want to keep working in the midst of tragedy. Because honestly, that can be a trauma response. Can we pause right there? Can we pause for a second? Because one thing about trauma responses, because it feels normal to us, it's a part of our normalcy, it doesn't feel like it's maladaptive. It doesn't feel like it's wrong for me to do. Right? That's literally the product of a response to trauma. It's something that we've learned to live with. It's something that we learn to adjust our behaviors to. But just because we learned how to adjust to it, just because we normalized it in our own lives, it does not mean that it's healthy. So yes, tending to overwork yourself, tending to power through it in the midst of a tragedy can definitely be a trauma response. And so we have to be mindful of when we are engaging in these trauma responses, because one thing about those trauma responses, baby, it does not heal your trauma. It does not help you cope with your trauma. It only reinforces the trauma. It's going to keep you in that same state simply because you're employing strategies that are unhealthy. So I want y'all to consider that. Number 2, how do we know it's time for us to take a break? When we are experiencing exhaustion. And oftentimes when we talk about exhaustion or feeling tired, feeling worn down, it don't be physical all the time, right? A lot of times, specifically with me, if I know I'm going through like life situations, the exhaustion for me isn't necessarily physical. It's more so an emotional exhaustion. It's more so a cognitive exhaustion. It's more so just feeling like I want to kind of disconnect. I'm exhausted. I'm worn down spiritually. I'm worn down mentally, right? And so when we're feeling exhausted, just because you're not physically exhausted doesn't mean that you're not at that state. That's why it's really important to know how to check in with ourselves, to know what we're experiencing, and could we be experiencing exhaustion in other ways, in other domains of our lives. And one of the problems with exhaustion, when we don't know how to recognize it, and we continue to work and not giving ourselves a break, and we start going back to that concept of pouring from an empty cup. And I'll tell you, I'll be the first one to tell you, when you are pouring from an empty cup, from a place of exhaustion, then your craft is going to be impacted. That means that if I experience some sort of trauma or life tragedy or some sort of emotional disturbance, if I'm in that state and I attempt to continue to power through it, and I attempt to continue to just work through it, I might show up less creatively than I would. Even in our families, you might not show up in that full capacity of parenting as you typically do, because you're attempting to power through from a place of exhaustion and not giving yourselves those breaks. You might experience even difficulty in the way you're showing up. Let's say you're an entrepreneur or a business owner. Your business might start to be impacted. The service you provide might start to be impacted. The things that you're giving your employees, everything related to your business that your hands are in might start to be impacted when you're attempting to pour from an empty cup, when you're attempting to continue to work from a place of exhaustion. Some of y'all are wondering, why am I experiencing burnout? Why am I not as creative as I used to be? Why am I not able to show up as effectively and efficiently in my content, in my creativity, in my business from an entrepreneurial standpoint? Why am I not as efficient as I used to be? Could it be because you're producing from a place of exhaustion and you're not learning how to check in with yourself? And so when it comes to learning how to show up for ourselves from that mental health perspective, we have to learn how to take a step back and to assess, am I exhausting myself? Am I over-exhausting myself? What does that look like for me? Because exhaustion to one person might look totally different from exhaustion for another person. And how do I rectify that? Right? So we're still here. We're still talking about ways that we recognize when it is time for us to take a break. Number 3, are y'all writing this down? Because this is good to me. If I ain't preaching to nobody else, I am preaching to myself on today. Okay? So number 3, increased stress. Increased stress, right? So when we talk about stressors, they're a part of life. Stresses are a part of life. I can literally leave the studio and go into traffic and drive and be in traffic, right? That's a stressor, right? I can go home and realize that I'm out of cereal or milk or whatever, and I have to go to the store. That might be a stressor. I might go to the store and realize that the line is like super long. That's considered a stressor. Those are called everyday stressors. But if I'm at the point where I'm experiencing stressor on top of stressor on top of stressor, and it's impacting my stress levels, right? If it's impacting my stress in my body, then that is when I know it might be time for me to take a break. It might be time for me to step back. And so why is it important for us to assess stress in the body? Well, let me tell you, because stress in the body isn't necessarily just a feeling, right? So yes, absolutely, you can feel stress. Don't get me wrong. So you can, emotionally feel stress. You can physically feel stress. But even from a biological standpoint, when we put our bodies through stress, we might not realize how it's impacting us from a neurotransmitter type of level, right? The neurotransmitters that might be released at that time. Even from a hormonal level, right? So when the body is put through an increased amount of stress, it excretes a hormone called cortisol, right? And so cortisol being released at excessive amounts with excessive stress is detrimental to the human body. So when we're taking on a lot and we're noticing ourselves going through stressor after stressor, and we're just powering through it and we're not giving ourselves time to rest and recover, that not only impacts you from an emotional state, a mental state, but also from a physical state. Because let me tell you, one thing about that stress, it's not just going to impact you and the people around you. You might snap on somebody every once in a while. It's not just going to impact you from that angle, But when it starts to create ulcers in the body, or even increase migraines and headaches and tension in the body, tension in the stomach and the back and those areas, you will start to feel it. But the goal is to not get to that point. You want to start preventive, be preventative as opposed to reactive. I hope this is blessing y'all, because this is even blessing me. So those are the 3 ways, the 3 times we need to recognize that it's time for us to take a break. And oftentimes, Chanel, so when you hear people tell you to take a break, what do you hear? Do you hear them saying like, oh, you need to take a step back, you need to stop doing, you need to, yeah, okay, she's nodding her head. So that's often how people hear this, right? This concept of taking a break, because you don't want to pour from an empty cup. Even while I was in the classroom as a professor in psychology, one thing I used to always preach to my students is knowing when to take a break. And let me tell you, it never failed. I always would have that one student, well, Dr. Reynolds, you just don't understand. I got finals this week. I got this week. I got this next week. But one thing we have to keep in mind is that when I say take a break from what we're experiencing so that we don't burn out, it doesn't mean that you have to book a vacation to Jamaica next week. It doesn't mean that you have to take a day off and go to the spa for a full day. Because let me be honest with you, everybody, number 1, doesn't have the resources for that. Number 2, everybody don't have the time for that. Number 3, some people are experiencing stress that they can't just escape from for days and weeks at a time. For instance, parenting. That is a significant stressor. But you can't just say, all right, I'm going to just take a break from parenting for a bit and just focus on myself. You can't do that. You can't do that. Right? And so one of the ways that I want you guys to start practicing taking a break is to embrace micro-restoration. To embrace and start practicing micro-restoration. So not only does micro-restoration help us from that cognitive level, it's a method of taking a break from things, but it also acknowledges that people are busy and life be lifing, and we don't have the time all the time to step away from the things that we're doing for days at a time. So what micro restoration is, it's basically allowing yourself pockets of time throughout the day, or even once a day, to tend to yourself. So that means that, yes, you might be stressed about, being a parent, or yes, you might be stressed about having this project to do for your schoolwork. But micro restoration basically means, okay, around 6 o'clock, I'm going to give myself 15 minutes to listen to my favorite song. I'm going to give myself 10 minutes to take a hot shower. I'm going to give myself 30 minutes to go pray or do some sort of spiritual practice that you engage in. So when we practice micro-restoration, we're embedding the concept of taking a break into our daily lives so that it's not taking away from the things that we still are obligated to do. And I promise you, when we implement those types of things, then we will start to experience a difference in how we are showing up with ourselves, our relationships, our families, our creativity. All of those things will begin to thrive even more. But what we cannot do, brothers and sisters, is to try to continue to pour from an empty cup. Because I promise you, it ain't going to work. Like, no matter how hard you try, it's just not going to work. So I really hope that these concepts really blessed you today. Like I said, it was blessing me even talking about it. It was blessing my twin sister over there, Chanel, because I saw her nodding her head and engaging. Because we all need those moments, right? We all need those moments of micro restoration. And I just want to remind you to not pour from an empty cup. It not only impacts you, but it impacts the people around you, and it impacts your ability to produce. Producing will be a lot more difficult when you're pouring from an empty cup. So that is our show for today. Typically, we end off with Ask Dr. Chanda. So if you guys have a question, make sure that you text it to 21000, and I will be sure to feature your question on the next episode of the podcast. And don't forget, you have the power to create the emotions that you want to experience.